Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome everyone to the latest edition of the Weco-Webinar series. My name is Balázs Horváth. I'm the managing director of Weco-Travel, and I'm going to host you through this roughly, I would say, 40 minutes when we will talk about a very popular subject of today, which is sustainability. But first of all, I would like to encourage you to write questions on the chat wall if there's anything that you would like to hear in more details about. Even though if you are not, I mean, if you are shy in English, you can write in Hungarian. I will translate it to our distinguished guest, whom I will introduce shortly. This webinar will be recorded and then shared later on our YouTube website channel. And I think this is all I have to tell you about the housekeeping stuff. And now back to the subject. We're gonna talk about sustainability in general, and more specifically, what we can do to have sustainable business travel. I think this is, as I said to you, a very popular subject. You can hear from everywhere. Sustainability is in the news, is in the media, is in the company meetings, perhaps, but I'm not 100% sure that everybody has a clear and common understanding of its meaning, and that's why we decided to discuss this subject in more details. That's one thing. The other reason, of course, is that Weco-Travel is very much supporting a smart and sustainable travel, not only in business, but B2C as well. And this year for us will be, I think, famous for this support, what we would like to give to our clients. I'm having with me today Mr. Horst Bayer from GSTC, which stands for Global Sustainable Tourism Council, but he also has a long track record being in the other side. I mean, I am in the travel agency side, and he is in the company side, working as a global travel manager of Siemens and Hitachi as well for years. So he has very much and very deep experience. We plan to also have Bernard Harop. He's a very experienced fellow in this field as well, but unfortunately Bernard had a private matter that got in the way at the last minute, so he couldn't be with us today. So, well, I think, first of all, Horst, if you could tell us a little bit more about your background, about GSTC, and what is it about, just for introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Balázs. And yes, my background, like you mentioned, it is really coming from the travel management side. So I've been a travel buyer, a travel manager for many years for Siemens and also for Hitachi data systems. So I do know the buyer side very well. And I'm working together with the GSTC. On the GSTC side, I'm part of the business travel working group. But I'm also the course instructor for our travel courses, which I'm going to explain in a second a little bit deeper. So the GSTC is really an organization, non-profit and non-governmental organization, and which is the very global. So the CEO resides in Korea, and they have members all over the world. So something really, really global, and they're the keepers, let's say, for the standards in travel and tourism. And I think you already had a session about GSTC, and so they explained a lot. So I don't want to go into too much into that for what GSTC is. So when we talk about business travel and sustainability, we really need to understand what sustainability means, and that is really keeping the three aspects of sustainability, which is planet, people, and profit. We try to keep that really in balance. So when we talk about people, we really mean this the societal part of it, and planet would be the environmental part of it or aspects of it, and the profit side would be the economical part of it. And we always think, when we about talking about a travel program, really more about the economical part of it, bringing on savings and additional savings to our program. But there's much more what we have to do and consider when we talk about sustainability. So we have to include environment and the social part, and we really have to try to keep that in a balance. And I want to we're going to talk about fundamentals today. But if you really want to learn more about sustainability, we also with GSTC offer an online training course for 4 weeks. So the next one is going to be in June, starting June 1st, and we have a course for 4 weeks, online training with 9 live sessions. So there will be live sessions, but also we're using a training portal, so you can read and also watch videos on that. So I could encourage you, so if you really want to learn more about sustainability within the business travel industry, then you can sign up for this course on GSTC.
Yeah.
So when we talk in about business and in business travel, we really talk, when we talk about people, we really mean the people, the traveler safety, the traveler security on it, the well-being, and the diversity, inclusion, equity, called DEI on that. So that's more the people side of it. I don't need to explain the economical side of it, savings. But the people side is, like I said, it's traveler safety, security, well-being, and the DEI, everything around the traveler and the people that the traveler is in contact with. And then when we talk about the environmental part of it, and I think now I would really like to go into a little more detail to understand the environmental part of it, because we talk about climate change, we talk about climate crisis. So we really would like to understand what the impact is on.
Yeah, let's go back to the fundamentals.
With the concentration. So in the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration. So if you really consider that over the past 800,000 years, and we see the line is going up and down, and when we have a low concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we really talk about ice ages. And you can see in the past 800,000 years, we had about 8 ice ages. So every 100,000 years, we do have another ice age, but also we do have a warming period, and that is really when it's below 300. And if you look at the last ice age, that's 12,000 years ago, in that area, that's really when the human being, when the civilization really started, and it was really favorable for the civilization, for human beings to grow. And this is when the humans took over the planet. And if you see at the last line of it, so you can see that we are really, really with the industrial revolution, we really went up with these concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. So we can say that the people that are living today are the first ones who live with such a high concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere that never any human being has experienced before. Have a look at the last centuries since the Industrial Revolution. You see this line really going up as well. And if I put in my, if you look at the concentration right now, we at more than 422 parts per million of CO2 particles in the atmosphere, and that is really high. Like I said, no one else has experienced that. And the bad thing is, this is growing. This is going up year by year. And if I put in my birthday, for example, you can see that I feel also kind of responsible for that. So since I'm here, you know, this line is really going up. I know it's not just only me, but it's really how I consume, how I eat, you know, all of that, and of course how I move, how I travel as well, and that is really important to understand as well. So this line is going up, and we're talking about that, but we also have to understand that, you know, where we're going in that. And here's a slide, you know, showing that we already know we're at 1.1 degrees Celsius global warming right now since the Industrial Revolution, and we are trying to keep below 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's the reason why we're trying to decarbonize the atmosphere, or the industries, also all the industries, you know. And but right now we are really heading towards something that's really bad, and that's lies. If you listen to the last IPCC reports, we're going to a global heating to 2.7 degrees Celsius. That is how if we continue the way how we work, consume, move today. And then you can see where our future lies ahead. This is really going between dark orange into the red zone. So that is really not so good if you look at that. But there are good things, you know. We are talking about. We are talking about. The bad thing is we're talking for 3 decades about that. But now it's really getting more serious on how to address the carbon concentration in the atmosphere. And when we talk about decarbonization of the industries, you know, and all the nations, all the governments get together from the planet and talk about this. And you've heard about the Paris Agreement, and that they're going to agree to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees. It's also the companies. So the governments of each country say, you know, the companies can do something too, and they are doing that. So they developed the greenhouse gas protocol, and that it really shows how we, what can we report, and how we're going to report on that, on CO2 emissions, or let's say all these greenhouse gases. And this is a new language for the travel industry, but I think when more and more people understand when we talk about scope 1, 2, and 3, what it really means. So, but it's really important that we all as travel manager understand what it really means, because a company needs to decarbonize their operations, and then they talk about these different scopes, and scope 1 is really the direct emissions. So in the case of an airline, it would be their airplanes, their fossil fuels that they're using on their airplanes. So that would be, for example, for an airline, scope 1. And of course, scope 3 is, you know, heating up these offices, and that's also important. And scope 3 is really the value chain of all these up and down stream activities. And that is interesting because, you know, scope 3 includes business travel. So, and that is really the emissions that coming from transportation of employees. They need to travel for the companies, and we have to track the emissions that come from air travel, rail travel, bus, automobile, and other modes of travel. And it could also voluntarily or optionally include the emissions from staying in hotels. So that's in a nutshell. But when we talk about in our classes about in GSTC, we go into more details into that. So this is important to capture, and let's talk about the impact of the environmental impact of business travel, and that is important also to understand. So if we we can see according to the United Nations that the tourism CO2 emissions, that they grew 60% just within 10 years, between 2005 and 2016. So that's a 60% increase just in 10 years on the CO2 emissions on that. And we also understand that right now the transportation related CO2 emissions causing 5% of all global emissions. That was in 2016, and it's pretty much the same, still a little bit higher on that. But if we do business as we do right now, this will increase to 25% in 2030. So that is also very important to understand, that the transportation sector needs to change, needs to do something different in order to reduce the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. Now, going back to a company's travel program, it's also important to understand that in an average, a company's travel program, really, it's about 90% the emissions are coming from the air travel side. So that is really, if you really wanted to have an impact on it, focus on air first, and then on the other areas as well in your travel program. And that is really important, that we understand that how can we decarbonize our travel program in that area. But with that, I also understand that Weco-Travel is doing some good stuff, and you recently had a survey out for your members and clients. So Balas, probably that's for you to explain that a little bit more in detail.
Not very much, but recently, in the recent months, we have given out a survey among our clients, and I think more or less 60 of them answered a survey, and the results are here to see. There are 2 sections in this very simple and very short survey. The first section is more about the general view on sustainability, and the second one, which we'll see, is more about business travel, how to make it sustainable. And of course, this is not a statistically representative data. At least it is good to have for us and representative for our clientele, at least. But for me, at first sight, and also for second sight, it was not very much or very many surprises. As you can see, which is very good to see, by the way, that everywhere sustainability is in high priority. The majority of the companies have a sustainability program, also have a responsible person for this program. But if I go down and see the results of questions number 4 and 5, it is, for me at least, stands out that the cost of the sustainability, or how to be sustainable, at least they perceive it as this gonna be a more expensive way to behave. And this is a little bit of a burden, of a barrier for them to do so. So I would reflect back on this issue later on with you, Horst, if you don't mind. And the second part of the, yes, thank you. The second part of the survey is more about, as I mentioned, business travel and how to make it more sustainable. The first question is interesting to see that how the companies actually apply to reduce the environmental impact of business travel. And number one was choosing a direct flight instead of transfers. Number two was reducing travel and doing virtual meetings instead. For me, again, this is very much something to do with the cost, not only the sustainability. And the second question is what they require from us as travel agents to help travel in a more sustainable way. And we will talk about it later, I think, because I have a couple of questions about it. Namely, the first one, how a travel agency can show alternative ways to travel. It's a very interesting question, of course. And the remaining 2 or 3 answers are interesting for me, a little bit in a negative way, the next 2, because it clearly shows that at least in the business travel segment, among our clients, they don't know or they don't actually measure the results of the CO2 emissions, which of course provide us with an opportunity to teach them how to do that. But it's a little bit in opposite what they said earlier about that. Sustainability is a high priority for them. And the last one is again with the cost. I think 10% is the winner in the question that how much more would you like to pay for a more ecological friendly way of travel. So, I mean, this is the results. This is the result. I think more or less 60, as I mentioned, 60 clients answer the questions. And just to start the question and answer segment, I would stick on a little bit on this cost issue, because Hungary is very much a cost-driven country. I think all Central European region is a cost-driven country. So the companies and the people are a little bit afraid of how much does it cost to be sustainable. So Horst, I mean, could you tell us, first of all, does sustainable business travel pay off, in the short and the long run? Is it really that expensive, do you think, compared to the normal way of traveling? And you know, how can we manage our way to be sustainable and not spending so much money in the same time?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Balázs. And first of all, I think your survey is spot on. So if I see other surveys from Global Business Travel Association and others, they're pretty similar to that. So it's really spot on that. And to answer your question, really, you know, first of all, the advice that I would give to a travel manager is really to assess the importance of the reduction of emissions in their travel programs, because every company is different. Every company has a different culture. So when you really realize how important is business travel, the emissions coming from business travel compared to your company's scope 1 emissions. In that way, you're already starting to get a feeling how important it is, because a manufacturing company is doing different than a consulting company would do, or financial company. So consulting financial companies, it could be up to 80% of their overall company emission could come from business travel, while on other sectors it might be very low. It might be only 5 or 10%. So it really depends how important that reduction of emissions is in the company. So you probably get a feel, you know, if your executive management says you need to do something, you have to do something. So you better be prepared for doing that, regardless of how much emissions you have in your travel program. But when you do that, it's also probably coming from your own interest. So first of all, try to get a team together and see how you can work with them on that. And you know, you mentioned how is it really that expensive? I think we also have to consider how expensive is it if we don't do anything, you know, if we do nothing. And at the end, this is going to be a much higher cost for everybody involved, for the society and the companies as well, you know, because these climate crises are coming and pushing other crises in front of them, and we're already feeling the impacts of that. So we agree that we have to do something. And is it expensive? Not so expensive into dealing with these consequences of climate change.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm just in the meantime reading the questions which are arriving, and the last question is very simple. Can we go back to the last slide, please?
Sure.
Because
to the survey slide.
Survey. I think this is the last slide, I guess. Or if it's not the one, then please write us again. And there's a question, a real question, that how many of these clients have actually implemented sustainable business travel programs? I don't know actually by heart, because this was not a question of the survey, but I can tell that I would say, in our experience, a tiny fragment of our clientele has or have actually implemented a sustainable business travel program. And they are mostly the multinational companies, not the SMEs. So this would be my answer to the question.
And sustainability, if I might add, is really a journey, and that is not something that you're going to say, I'm going to implement sustainability now, and this is done and done and over. No, it's really a journey. You have to add on. You have to start with first steps, and it's not something like you say, do I have a sustainable travel program? No, how do I start it, and when do I start it? I think that's the more important question than on that.
Yeah. Okay. Could you just tell us a few examples what a company can do to reduce its travel emissions? We are talking about kind of possible ways to do that for a while. For instance, what is your opinion about offsetting or reducing, or offsetting, or reducing and offsetting? I don't know how to put the question. There are alternative ways of, for instance, the sustainable aviation fuel, one of them. I would like to hear your opinion about it. And yes.
Yeah, Balash, I think first of all, it's important that we, reduce our travel intensity. So you might not like to hear that as a TMC, but it's something that we really need to mention first right now. If you really want to have an impact on that, we have to reduce our travel our trips, and really to avoid what we can avoid. And really, when we start, we have to treat travel as an investment. So if I need to travel, if I need to travel on company business, what value does it bring to my company? What value does it bring to myself? In that regard, is it really so important that I travel, or can I do something different? And that's a whole subject by itself. But assume we cannot avoid, or we cannot stop traveling. That's for sure. We cannot do that. We need to travel. But first, we need to identify: do we really have to travel? Then, if we consider yes, we need to have to travel, what impact does it have on the people and the environmental side of it? And can I avoid air travel? Saying, if I really would like to reduce the emission, is it possible to use different modes of travel? Going domestic, using the train, or even continental European travel would be a way to travel by train, because that's the probably least having the impact on the environment on that. But you also can, like you mentioned it earlier, fly direct, non-stop. It is possible. It might be a little bit more expensive, or could be, but it really helps to bring these CO2 emissions down. But also, if you're able to travel with a newer aircraft, that's also affecting a lot. There's I think from 10% to 15% possibility to reduce emissions, if you take a newer aircraft. So and to the least, how you pack, how much luggage do I take? Because as lighter you are, as less emissions are going to be coming into the atmosphere. So this is also important to consider. And then you would go into the really last option, and that would be offsetting. And offsetting is really, there are many programs out there, and I really would encourage you to look into that very deep and see what is behind these companies, what do they offering. So I'm in favor of direct air capture, saying a company that really reduces removes the CO2 particles in the atmosphere. So that is something that you really have to consider. I'm not so a fan of reforestation. It's good, but as a company, it's really difficult to put money into something that you say might not exist in 5 to 10 years anymore. So be careful on that. You also mentioned SAF, so the sustainable aviation fuel.
Yeah.
It is important. I mean, it could be a solution of many for the airline industry, but it's not the solution. So
can you just, sorry to interrupt you, just can you explain to the audience what does it mean, sustainable aviation fuel, because it's not obvious for everyone. Yeah.
Okay. Right now, an airplane flies on fossil fuel, on kerosene, and so it has the worst impact on that. So, but there are other options, if you go in with residual waste, like used cooking oil, that you use bio waste and put that into fuel and use it. And then you can reduce the CO2 emissions up to 80%, but you have to see the whole life cycle of it, because it doesn't matter which fuel you're going to use in an aircraft. At the end, it's going to be the same emissions of CO2, regardless whether it's SAF or it's from fossil fuel. There's no difference. But if you see it, for example, if you take out the CO2 out of the atmosphere and splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen, and use the hydrogen together with the CO2 that you captured from the atmosphere, you can create sustainable aviation fuel that can be used on that. So it is an option. It's not the solution of it, but it's an option which can help to reduce the emissions. And it's only, in my opinion, a bridge technology until the aviation industry is ready to bring electric or hydrogen airplanes into the market. And then we really start to reduce very efficiently CO2s when we fly.
Yeah, but it's probably going to take a long time to arrive to the hydrogen.
It will take, but they say, within within this century, so 2099 probably. Could be that we really flying all on hydrogen or electric aircraft on that. So it takes a while. The first step is the goal that we're going to have for 1.5 degree Celsius global warming. That should be 2030, and then by 2050 we are talking about 90% of decarbonizing the aviation industry. So it's a huge goal. And we only can do that if we work together.
Yeah, of course. There is another question regarding the cost. I think this is a very popular issue. Given that your market, I mean, of course, Hungary or Eastern Europe, so given that your market is very price sensitive, do you believe that these clients will actually be willing to incur incremental cost 10% plus to make business travel sustainable? For me, myself, I do believe, yes, they have to do so. Because they have to catch up to the trend, and they have to feel the sense of urgency sooner or later. If not today, then tomorrow. I don't know. What's your opinion about it?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Given that your market, I mean,
the price
our market is price sensitive. Yeah.
And in the future, the prices are going to increase. That's for sure. We are in a crisis, in an energy crisis. The price is going to increase, and so it's not only if it's going to be sustainable. Does it increase with sustainability? I don't think that sustainability is the only drive for that. So it might affect a little bit, but I think there are other areas that impact the price increase more than sustainability. So we have to deal with increased prices. That's for sure.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. I've mentioned before that somehow the CO2 emission measurement was missing, at least in a part of our clients. And why is it important to measure sustainability? And if it's important, of course, then how is it possible to measure? What are the ways? How to set realistic goals, and so on and so on? Can you tell us a few words about it?
You only manage what you measure is a phrase out there, and that is really important. So yes, we need to measure, or a company needs to measure what their CO2 emissions are, and you have seen the greenhouse gas protocol. Yes, they have to do it, and there are standards out there. They are not really good standards yet, but at least it's a starting point for that. The industry, the business travel or the travel industry, is talking about improving those standards, and they're doing a good job in working on it to understand really and drive more accurate data on that. So, but for you as a travel manager, it is important that you start with what you have, and it's not perfect yet on the methodology, how it's captured. But you have to start with something and show something, and later on you can adjust these numbers when better methodologies are going to be out there. So it is important that you start to measure and what you have.
Mm-hmm.
And to set the realistic goals, I think, was the other question. First of all, I think if you if you don't know where to start, consult your teams here. I can say from Weco-Travel, for example, their executive management, they went through these GSTC courses, so they're all certified now on sustainable business travel. So there could be a good contact. But other TMCs are also, sorry to mention that, but they're also getting more into the race and understand more. You can also use external consultants on that. But as more and more companies really work with science-based target initiatives, that's an organization that were built from NGOs, and to work together with corporations and show them and help them how to reduce or setting targets and how to reduce and reach the limit for 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. So that is, if you see what they are doing, and then you can set targets and do it in a smart way. Don't say I'm going to set my targets based on the year 2021 or 20. Just consider that we had this pandemic problem, and your business travel went down probably 60 to 90%. But if you take the right baseline, that would be, or good baseline would be the numbers from 2019, and say I would like to reduce by X% my travel business, my CO2 emissions from business travel based on 2019 base year.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And let me add that, as far as I know, measurement will be more and more important as the EU plan to introduce a mandatory reporting on sustainability in 2 or 3 years. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
For companies above a certain size, of course, but it's coming. And thank you for the promotion, by the way. Yes, in Weco-Travel we have a couple of certified travel consultants to help our clients, and we also have, and this is serious, a very thorough and deep and detailed reporting system. Actually, we can report on anything relating sustainability what our clients want us to do so. Okay, since we are starting to run out of time, another question, or a last question which occurred to my mind, is that we are facing this question in our company as well. However, we are a TMC, but I think this is irrelevant of what type of company we are working for. The question is that how to motivate our people and how to drive the changes within the company. And I think the right question is for the travel managers probably is that how to make sure that they put people first and they care about the travelers' well-being.
Yes, I would totally agree, putting people first. So again, it would be to
because you mentioned this is one of the pillars of the,
and that is important. Travelers' well-being and safety, of course, is top priority. When they go on a business trip, they need to travel safe, and but it shouldn't impact the travelers' health. So well-being is important. It's really to keep an eye on that, not only on the environmental part of it, but also on the people or on the traveler side on that. So that is important. But how to motivate, it really depends on their culture. So in my opinion, if you have a staff, I'm a baby boomer, meaning I do remember all the old stuff. For me, it was like traveling was like a perk, I felt important. So it probably is a good way to motivate people and showing them depends on which generation they're coming from. You know, if they're boomers, you need to convince them. You have to find a way to bring them on board and tell them, you know, hey, what you did for the future of the planet, that wasn't good. So help it now to make it different. But there's new generations coming, you know, Gen Z and all the other generations that now entering the labor force, and they're coming with a different mindset. So probably you don't need to change a lot of mindset in for them. They coming and probably doubt that they have to travel all the time, and so it is good for that. So it really depends. How is the culture of your company in order? So if there are more baby boomers in higher position, then you probably need to really convince them to do something. And then if you have a younger workforce, then probably you just go with the flow and do what they also recommend. So, but you know, go out there, listen to your employees, to your travelers on what they think can do in order to make your travel program more sustainable.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, there is one more question, by the way. Well, one more question. This is the last one. I'm going to read up. This is to you, I think. And there is one other. Okay. So the first one. What partners does GSTC work in Hungary? Are there good practices in which GSTC participated in Hungary?
GSTC right now has a focus on tourism as in totality. You know, it's for leisure travel as well as for business travel. So I really cannot say who is responsible, the partners from the GSTC side in Hungary. I really don't know about that. So that's something that probably, Balázs, you need to talk to the GSTC directly. So on the business travel side, I would really say Weco is a good partner on that on the business travel side. But other, you know, they do have hotels, they do have destinations as members, tour operators as members, business travel organization like TMCs and others. So they have, you know, their membership portfolio is really big. So I really cannot tell who is that.
Maybe we can set up the business travel, I don't know, segment in Hungary, leading with Weco-Travel as your first and reliable partner. All right, really the last question. Regarding electric transportation, do you really believe that this is the real solution? We read more and more about insufficient raw materials for the lithium batteries that will run out of it. Also, the whole process needs a lot more energy compared to what we save on using electric transportation. So the question is that, do you really believe that electric transportation would be a future solution?
It depends. You know, right now I would say the cars, we are way advanced now with electric mobility. So I think that the answer for that would be yes. If you talk for the aviation industry, I would say it depends. I think we can have the private airplanes really in as electric airplanes because they are small aircraft. And for the bigger airplanes, short haul, probably we can say a combination between electric and hydrogen would be an option. And there is no solution yet for long distance or long range aircraft. So that is going to be, you know, but you never know what's coming up as a technology. So hydrogen might be possible, but it will reduce the number of passengers in an aircraft enormously. I don't know if they can fly profitable on that, but we we need to know. I'm not an expert in these technology, but I would say, if electricity, all of that, we need to change. We have to have more renewable energies. If you really think even about sustainable aviation fuel and using hydrogen, but hydrogen needs to be developed and produced, and you do that with the electrolyze and use water, split it up in oxygen and hydrogen. But it needs a lot of energy for that as well. So we need to speed up using these green energy sources, the renewables that we can, and then we have a chance. If you don't do that, then we're doomed.
Yeah.
My personal opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. And I think that we are really running out of time, so we have to stop here and finish the session. Of course, there is a lot to say more and think further, which I let you do so privately. And thank you very much, Horst, that you were with us today. Thank you very much for the audience for listening to us. And please follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook and give us feedback. And probably our next session will be in June sometimes with a different subject, probably a very interesting one as well. And please stay for 10 seconds after my speech in front of the screen and give us a feedback. I think we have 2 questions. How did you like today's edition? And what are your ideas? What are you interested in to discuss in our future sessions? So with this, I will leave. And again, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Horst. And see you soon, hopefully. Have a nice afternoon. Goodbye.